Hello chess friends and welcome to Jozarov chess channel and welcome to the last round of the FTX Crypto Cup tournament in 2022. We're following now of course the derby of the day, but it's actually also the derby of the whole event because we have now the beautiful match game between the world champion Magnus Carlsen and Praggnanandhaa. This is now really a specific situation that we're having before the last round because Pragg has 2 points less than Magnus Carlsen, but if he wins now his game in the direct duel, then he could be the winner of the whole thing, which is really incredible. We're having now really a situation where Pragg has now to win the match game in order to be the winner. It's almost like in the 80s, you know, when the world championship challenger had to win the game against the world champion in order to become world champion himself. So it's really, as I said, a specific situation, but of course for the beauty, for the drama, I think the whole chess world is now really enjoying this beautiful derby. So let's see now what happened. We're diving into game one immediately. You know the grip, they're playing 4 rapid games, and then maybe if the 4 games end in a draw, then we'll see 2 additional blitz games and maybe also the beautiful Armageddon game. So let's see now what happened in the game one. Magnus Carlsen played with the white pieces, Pragg played with the black pieces. So Magnus opened with the move knight to f3, we have d5, and after move g3 we have now again the King's Indian attack. So basically Magnus is now playing many times, I've noticed it at least, he's playing the King's Indian attack and also the Catalan opening. So maybe after move c4 the game can transpose into Catalan structures. Here in the continuation, here we have the move c5, which is now the so-called Sicilian variation of the King's Indian attack, bishop to g2, and now after move knight to c6 we have now d4. It's becoming now sort of a reverse Grunfeld setup that Magnus Carlsen is building here. We have e6, defending the position here in the center of the board, keeping the position compact. But the downside, of course, about this move, I'm not saying it's a mistake in accuracy or something, but many times in these types of structures you have problems to develop your light square bishop. You see then in the continuation of the game how Pragg will eventually get this bishop into the game in a beautiful way. So but so far on this diagonal the bishop cannot play. So here kingside castling, c takes d4 played by Pragg. We have knight to d4 and now bishop to c5. So the knight gets attacked. Here in the continuation we have now knight takes c6, and after move b takes c6 we have now really sort of a reverse Grunfeld setup where if you if you have played maybe many times the game with the white pieces against sort of the Grunfeld defense, then many times with the white pieces you have sort of a structure c3 d4 e3 or something. So now basically we have sort of a reversed setup here by black, and the idea is clear by white. White needs now to break the center here with some moves like c4, knight to c3, maybe if the position allows it also with the move e4, because the most powerful piece now for white is of course this beautiful light square bishop on this diagonal. So this is now the strategic goal, just breaking now and letting the position explode here in the center of the board. So that's why c4 immediately, knight to f6, Pragg protects the center, develops of course the piece, and also prepares kingside castling. Queen to c2, there is of course this threat, c takes d5, discovered attack against the bishop, so that's why Pragg plays queen to e7, pretty standard stuff. So knight to c3, again, even if you play here d takes c4, this is of course not good. In no way Pragg is going to play this move, even if this pawn is protected. That's not the point of it, but you cannot really never take out this pawn on c4 because the structure becomes really weak. The pawn on c4 was weak, the pawn on c6 was weak, also then of course the a7 pawn is weak. So this is not the way to go. So as I said, even if you have your pawn on c6 protected, never do this kind of stuff. So after move knight to c3 we have kingside castling, bishop to f4, provocative move here by Magnus Carlsen. He's hoping for maybe e5, and then he could play bishop to g5, pinning the knight that is controlling of course for the d5 square. I think then black could have really some tactical problems around the square d5. Look at this, the knight is controlling this, everything is basically now a battle for one square. So this is really a provocative move that Magnus Carlsen pulled off here, but here Pragg kept the game calm, played simply, as I said in the beginning of the video, beautiful move. Bishop to c4 is developing now at least the bishop on a beautiful diagonal. So here in the continuation we have knight to a4 attacking now the bishop. Again, the threat is c takes d5, discovered attack against the bishop on c5. So that's why bishop to b4, we have a3, and now bishop to d6 played by Praggu. So we have bishop to d6, we have the queen to d6. The problem is, I think here after move rook to d1, that you cannot again take out the pawn on c4. You get queen to c4, the queen is hanging here on the d file. So here in the continuation, after rook from f to d1, we have queen to e7 by Praggu. Praggu escapes from any attacks on the d file, secures the queen, and maybe if you can somehow hold now the position in the center of the board, maybe with ideas of rook to c8, maybe with rook to d8, maybe black could build here sort of a slow build up with e5, maybe c5, d4. Maybe black could actually prepare this move, but still I kind of like this long diagonal for the light bishop. So first, as I said, you have to get rid of your activity here. You have to maybe place the rook here on the c file, this other rook on the d file. So far pushing the pawns in the center is not possible, but as a long-term plan I think it could work here for black. So we have now b3. Magnus has to now finally protect the pawn on c4. We have now rook to b8 attacking now also the b3 pawn, becomes now I think the main target of black. So here Praggu is really trying to attack now this weak pawn. So we have queen to c3, we have finally c takes d takes c4, and after b takes c4, here Praggu plays an interesting move, c5. The cool part about this move c5 is that this pawn is on a dark square. So if you could just imagine maybe this position without both of these knights, maybe without the rooks, maybe without the queens, then black should be slightly better because of the ability to attack this pawn on c4. So basically white needs then to protect somehow this pawn, so the light square bishop would become actually a passive piece. So you should never forget about this kind of endgames where you have the same colors bishops on the board. Where are you placing your pawns in the continuation of the game, because they can of course become a target for your opponent. So as I said, beautiful move here by Praggu, c5, keeping the pawns on dark squares. So rook to d3. Magnus is sensing at least he could make something happen on the d file. That's the only file that he can attack. We have h6, rook from a to d1, and now rook to c8. So here Magnus plays the very interesting move, rook to d6, and this is a perfect move. He's attacking the bishop. You have to now make a reaction here with the bishop, but in the continuation Praggu played, in my opinion, maybe his first, I wouldn't even call it inaccuracy. It's also one of the suggested moves by the top engines. But here he played bishop to b7, and when we watch now this position, the only strength that Magnus Carlsen has here is of course the powerful d file battery by both of the rooks. There was here really a beautiful way how to get out of this mess, at least trade one of these rooks, and maybe really undermine the pressure that white has built here on the d file. The cool move that Praggu could have pulled off here was the move rook to b1. Rook to b1 is interesting because it deflects now the rook from the defense, and now we can also take out this one, and at least we have traded off, as I said, the rooks. Maybe Magnus can somehow occupy the d file, or maybe he can stay on the b file, but at least black I think, as I said, undermined the main strength that white has built here in the continuation of the game. But nothing wrong with bishop to b7. I just, as I said, kind of more like this move rook to b1. So okay, Praggu played bishop to b7, so still an equal position. Praggu played here really a brilliant opening line. We have queen to e3 by Magnus. He's attacking now the c5 weakness. We have bishop takes g2, king takes g2, and now queen to c7. And now comes one of the critical moments of this game. So here Magnus Carlsen has several opportunities. One of the main ideas, I think, in this game is somehow to maybe play knight to c3, maybe even knight to e4, deflect this knight. It's very important to get rid of this knight that is controlling maybe the d7 square. I think this is the only way to somehow make progress in this position. But of course, meanwhile, black is also doing something. Black can always compete on the d file by playing a rook to d8. So basically, it's a drawish position. No one can, I think, create some kind of a madness here. But here, Magnus decided to create some madness. And he played now really stunning, but a bad tactical shot. He played knight to c5. The idea about this move, knight to c5, is of course, if you take here queen to c5, then with rook to d8, you see this rook gets deflected from the defense of the queen. If you play something like king to h7, then look at this, queen to c5, rook to c5, and now you grab the rook and you're up the exchange. So this is simply winning game for white. But after knight to c5, here Pragg kept it calm. He said something is wrong with this move, this is not correct what Magnus Carlsen did, and whenever you get attacked, you should first watch for a beautiful counter attack, and that's exactly what Pragg did. He played the correct move, knight to e8. It comes with a double function, it attacks the rook, but it also cuts off this annoying attack on the 8th rank. So as we said, the main tactical goal of white was to move a rook to d8. Now this is not working, knight to e8. Here Magnus had to sacrifice the knight, but here after queen to b7, Pragg continued his pressure and has now the opportunity, of course, to take out the knight, but also maybe take out the rook. You could have also played queen to c4, because there is not a good way anymore to defend this this position for white. White is has now two pieces hanging. If you play, of course, rook to d4, look at this knight is hanging. If you play like this, then of course knight to d6 could happen. You could maybe take out the queen, but now with knight to c4, the queen is hanging, also the knight is hanging, so too many pieces are hanging. So this should be again completely winning. But okay, after move knight to e6, Pragg played the second best move. He played simply queen to b7, attack now the king. We have a rook to d5, and Pragg simply took FTX e6, and this should be, I think, completely winning position for black. So queen to e6, okay, Magnus grabbed now 3 pawns for the minor piece, but still this rook is a little bit paralyzed, the king is endangered, the knight will eventually come into the game. So far no problems, I think, here in black's position. So king to h8, queen to e4, we have a queen to c6, and now a rook to d4. Magnus is trying now to keep the possession glued together, and it's of course protecting now the c4 pawn. So we have now queen to a8, simply staying on this diagonal. This is very important because on this diagonal the pieces are a little bit paralyzed, the rook on d5, and of course here the queen on on e4. So after move queen to a8, Magnus continued here with the move rook to e5. Here Pragg took queen takes e4. We have rook takes e4, and now rook to c7. Very important move, I think, to not allow one of the rooks to get on the 7th rank, where of course they could be dangerous and could create, of course, some madness here on this rank. So here rook to e5, we have knight to f6, getting the knight into the game. f3, we have a rook to c8, attacking now the pawn on c4. Very important move. And now rook to a5, a counter attack by Magnus. He's trying, of course, also to grab this pawn. He's hoping that maybe Pragg takes out this one, then he could have a passer on the a file. But okay, here knight to d7. So again, Pragg is keeping the game calm. He's trying now to maybe get the knight here on b6, then maybe to take out with the knight, and then still keep his protection of the a7 pawn. So we have here after move knight to d7, king to f2, knight to c5, we have rook to d5, a6, we have g4, and now rook to c6 here by Pragg. So he's simply getting closer and closer to the center of the board. He's hoping now, of course, to somehow also include the king into the game. So we have now h4, king to g8, rook to f5. Magnus is cutting off here the potential ability of the king to get into the game. Rook to c7 was played by Pragg, h5. So Magnus is paralyzing also further the position on the king side. So knight to b7, attacking the rook, rook to d5, and now finally Pragg took. You see now how he simply played a slow game. He didn't want to rush anything. Now he finally grabbed the pawn. Now it's time maybe to go for this pawn on e2. It's still a long run. You cannot win this endgames very easy. You cannot win them immediately, but if you can keep your head clear, I think, like Pragg so far did, it's a perfect game for you. So rook to e5, a rook to c5, trying to simplify now the game by trading off more pieces. Rook to c5, rook to c5, and now f4 here by Magnus Carlsen. Maybe there was a better idea to just prolong the game to somehow, I don't know, maybe get maybe the king closer into the game. I think this was a more natural idea, but okay, rook to f4 simply by Magnus. He's trying now to maybe let this pawns rolling, maybe create some kind of a passer, maybe create two connected pass pawns here on maybe the E and the F file. So as I said, but if Praggo keeps the position like this, if Praggo of course plays a good game, then it's completely winning here for black. So king to f7, we have king to f3, knight to b7, rook to d5. Now the king comes in the center of the board. Very nice move by Praggo. Rook to e5, rook to king to d6, and now e3. Knight to c5. Again, Praggo is getting the knight into the game. There has to be, I think, some kind of a way maybe to get rid of this pawn. This is now the clear target. If you get this one, then of course black as a passer, and this should be winning. So here in the continuation, we have g5, we have knight to e6, we have g takes h6, g takes h6, and now rook to f5. Here Magnus Carlsen is trying to play rook to f6, and here maybe somehow attack the pawn on h6, then of course to have this passer on the h file. Maybe a better idea instead of this move, and I think this was maybe the only chance for Magnus Carlsen to make a draw in this position, was the move king to g4. Getting the king closer, I think, is crucial here, or maybe king to e4. You have to play now with the king. This was, in my opinion, the only way for Magnus to make something happen. But after move rook to f5, of course, Praggo is saying king to e7. You never really get your rook here. You're not getting this pawn on h6 for sure. So as I said, maybe king to g4 was more accurate, but now finally Magnus played king to g4, and now we have rook to c3. Both of these pawns are hanging. But this was also one of the critical moments, because here Praggo had the opportunity to force a trades of rooks, and if this would have happened, I think this is game over. Look at this, rook to c5. This was really a brilliant chance for Praggo to win the game immediately, and now you just chase this this small pawn, and then if you get it, then of course this is completely winning. Still, it's a long run. Of course, you have to play many times with the knight in order to get this pawn, but I think black should be much faster, and black should be winning here. So, but okay, after move king to g4, here Praggo played a rook to c3. I think 99% of any chess player in such a position, in such a fast time format game, would play rook to c3. But as I said, rook to c5 was really a beautiful chance for Praggo to maybe win the game immediately. So king to e5 by Magnus. He's threatening now ideas of f5. That's why we have king to f6, rook to f5 a check, king to g7, and now rook to e5, king to f7. Now Magnus plays again a perpetual, hopes now to maybe force a draw. Rook to e5, again Magnus is hoping for perpetuals, and now finally rook to c5. But it's a different story now, because here in this situation the king is now much closer. The pawns could be rolling, so here you then have to even trade off the rooks. You can play, of course, here the move rook to e4. So here Magnus played rook to e4. He's saying I will keep at least the rook in the game, and he's still threatening the move f5. So that's why king to f6, we have rook to a4, and now a5. So you see, Magnus is battling, Magnus is struggling here to get some kind of a draw. Really wild stuff. So we have now e4, and now after move knight to c7 by Praggo, we have now rook to d4. So again, Magnus played now with the rook. He's trying maybe to play rook to d6, and at least again force the king to step back. And now comes the critical moment of the game here, knight to e6. Here Praggo hoped maybe to get rid of this rook, but Magnus played here really a beautiful move, paralyzed now the king. He's threatening now also some ideas of e5 could be also a beautiful checkmate. So that's why here Praggo had to play now knight to f4. We have king to f4 and rook to h5, and this becomes now actually a drawish endgame. Instead of this move knight to e6, maybe king to e7 again, to not go with your king here into this checkmate pattern. Maybe this was a chance for Praggo to keep somehow the advantage in the game, but as I said, here he played unfortunately this move knight to e6, and Magnus sent some blood and played now really drawish line. So rook to d7, we have knight takes f4, as I said, rook to h5, now rook to d6, king to e7. So now a couple of checks, but as I said, this should be a drawish endgame. Here Magnus pushed the pawn further. Here Praggo is also pushing pushing this pawn further. You cannot, of course, take immediately because you get rook to b4 and you lose the game. So that's why king to d5, rook to d3, a check. Very important moves here. King to f5, rook to f3 again. Here Pragg is not allowing Magnus Carlsen to get close over their king. Here in the continuation again, king to f5, rook to f3, and here after rook to a3 we have a 3-time perpetual, and the game ended in a draw. So really stunning game, I think. I'm not sure what happened, but these are endgames, and you know that Magnus Carlsen is an endgame expert. Here probably had really great chances to win his first game with the black pieces here in this event, so huge opportunity, but still nothing is lost for both of them. Still probably has, I think, some great chances maybe to beat the world champion today. So okay, we'll see what will happen. This was now the game 1. I will cover more of these games of the super final, sort of, for sure. This is not the super final, but I will call it a super final because that's exactly, I think, what we wanted to get out of this event, that we have this position where Pragg has now to beat the world champion. So incredible tournament so far. So okay, see you soon with other great games, and as I always like to say, chess is the best, of course.